Okay, good evening to the Tuesday night lecture at the LA Chess Club. I thought tonight we'd do a couple of games from Napoleon Bonaparte. I don't know if the audience knows that during his reign as Emperor of the world in the early 1800s, he was a very good chess player. Today's ratings probably give him a solid A expert rating, and I've picked out two games that he played, one in 1802 when he was running the world, and one 18 years later when he had been exiled to the island of St. Helena. So the first game we're going to do is against Rimesat, which was, I suppose, one of his ministers helping him run the world. It's played in Paris, 1802, and Napoleon is black, Rimesat is white, and Rimesat starts e4. Great opening move. We all know this throughout history. Doesn't matter what center you play chess in. Allows the bishop out, allows the queen out, sits on one of the four center squares, and controls a center square. And Napoleon, being a general of the army, back then there were no tanks. There were lots of horses. Knight f6, which we all know today as the Alekhine defense, or Alekhine, Russian pronunciation. It had not even been invented for a little over 100 years later. Alekhine would come up with this and really make it a scientific opening, and it was played for many decades. It's still played now and then. It hasn't been busted totally, but the top players in the world really don't like moving this knight around 3 or 4 times after the pawn chases it. All right, so Napoleon's playing the Alekhine defense 100 years before it's invented. Rimesat d3, which is a little timid for white. I think perhaps chasing the knight once and then taking d4, which is the normal, okay? Or even knight c3 to protect the pawn. And this does not develop a piece. It blocks the light squared bishop, which you've already opened with e4, and it sort of takes away the advantage of e4 by locking in this light squared bishop. Now, it's true, it does allow the dark squared bishop to be developed, and I suppose if you want to come get the knight with the bishop, you could, which is sort of like a Trompowsky attack nowadays. Okay, so after d3, he loved his horses. You can say that about Napoleon. So both of his knights are out, c6, f6. White really should be fighting for the center right now. And sure enough, f4. Sort of looks like a Grand Prix attack against the Sicilian, or maybe a bird's opening. But remember, this was 1802. Hadn't been played yet. Napoleon challenges f4 with e5. You take me, I'll take back, and I'll have 2 knights coming right after you right away. So, sure enough, pawn takes, and knight takes. So, after 4 moves, Napoleon has both knights ready to jump over here to g4, controlling g4 twice. It's only controlled once by white. And it looks like these knights are going to get right into Rimesat's face with his king here. If he's not real careful, I smell a kind of sacrifice or mate coming. Knight c3, developing queenside before kingside. I think that's a mistake. I think he's asking for trouble. And sure enough, the f knight jumps to g4, and now we have 2 knights and a queen ready to jump over here with a check. Okay, now it could be blocked with g3, but I think with 3 pieces coming down on this king, I think white's already in serious trouble. d4 to attack the guard of this knight. You see the queen attacking the knight at g4. It's guarded by the knight at e5. What theme are we using to attack this? Removing the guard. One of the major tactics in chess. Just take away the guard of this piece and you'll be able to take this for free. So Rimesat is trying to remove the guard of the knight at g4. And of course, before he has a chance to remove the guard, Napoleon throws in his check. Queen to h4, check, and g3. Okay, so we have a queen under attack. We have a knight under attack. Queen to f6. Take my knight, please, and I will checkmate you right here at f2, because the queen will be guarded by the knight. Please take my knight, checkmate in 1, right? So, let's guard the checkmate square with knight h3. Finally developing the king side, but again, Ramesat can't remove the guard because he was being threatened with a mate in 1. And oh, what a beautiful little move this is. Knight to f3, check. Queen can't take the knight, guarded by the queen. And now you have a king on the run. Ooh. All right. So king e2. Look at this. Boy, is he making use of those knights. Knight takes pawn, check. Queen would love to take the knight. The problem is it's guarded by the queen at f6. So already those two knights are just tearing him apart in the center. Oh my. Look at that. King moves further out. Not a good sign when your king is your most advanced piece. Take a look at white's board. The king is the most advanced piece along with the knights on the 3rd rank. You are in very serious trouble when your king is the most advanced piece. Knight to check again. Now it's true the king can take this knight, but this knight, when it moves, will have a discovered check, and I think there's a checkmate in the air very soon. Sure enough, now the king is the most advanced piece for white. Bishop check. He didn't even give him a discovered check. He's offering another piece. Sure enough, king takes bishop. Look at that king. Way away. Look at white's army. Go, your majesty. Go, go, go. We'll take care of you later. Queen over to check the king. I think he's only got a couple of squares to go. I don't think he's got a couple. I think he's only got one. Because none of these squares are available. This square is not available. This square sees this is the only square that's available, right? Checkmate. Wow. And Napoleon mates his minister in 13 moves. All because he didn't develop the king side. Now, I have a little caveat about this game. If you are the emperor of the world in front of your ministers and your people in Paris in 1802, would you as a minister dare to beat the emperor of the world in front of those people and perhaps find your head on a stick the next morning? But Napoleon did play very strong with his horses. And since he was a general of the army back then when horses were the tanks of the time, it shows you the power of those two knights being developed immediately. Okay? And he only pushed one pawn, and he developed 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces as opposed to white's 1, 2. 4 against 2, then you're allowed to sacrifice those two, the knight and the bishop, and you're at least even. 2 at the end of the game, 2 at the end of the game, but you're checkmated. The power of development, even back then, 200 years ago. And it hasn't changed, and Morphy improved on it 50 years later in the 1850s. Okay.
Mitch, quick question. Did they come up with the theories back then of controlling the pawn center? Is that something people knew about?
No, they were playing around with different theories, and what was happening was people tried to get to the mid game as fast as they could, because the stronger players would still be able to calculate better than the average players, even in today. The problem for the stronger players today is that even an average player on a database can know an opening pattern to get him to mid game quickly, and so therefore his opening is not as inferior as Rumesat's was. Okay, he would know what to do against those moves, and the patterns had not been worked out back then. Okay, now if you can go to the Modern Chess Opening book, you have 50 of the major openings with the sub-variations going down to 15, 16 moves deep, still lead to equality on both sides. And at that point, everybody's looking for a novelty. And that's how grandmasters do it. They'll stick into a database, perhaps a Gioco Piano opening. Okay, and they know that after 15, 16 moves, this is where it's at for both white and black, and nobody's been able to take advantage of it. And they'll stick it into the database, and all of a sudden, move 17 or 18, the computer says, try this. And they'll spring it on another grandmaster in a major tournament, and it goes around the world as being the novelty of the day, and all of a sudden, it works. Perhaps it's a knight takes f7 sacrifice where the king has to take. And all of a sudden the king's running around for 3 or 4 moves, even though you're down a piece. Eventually, you either mate the king or get the material back because the king can't castle. I mean, that's what's happening now, because all of the patterns have been worked out. There's nothing new under the sun for most of the openings, 12, 13, 14, 15 moves deep. Everybody's always looking for that new jolt, that new excitement, that new move. Okay, so 18 years later, Napoleon has lost his bid to conquer the world, and he's on St. Helena, and he's in his exile, and he's visited by Bertrand, who probably was one of his other ministers, or perhaps one of the British council that was monitoring him on St. Helena. Napoleon this time is white instead of black, and Bertrand is black. Napoleon starts e4. I guess as general of the army, he knew best by test, even before Bobby said it 130, 40 years later. Bertrand goes e5. Everything looks very good. Knight f3. Finally, it looks like we're going to have a Roy Lopez. Knight c6, guarding the pawn under attack. And Napoleon decides to shock Bertrand with d4, which nowadays we know as the Scotch. That's correct. This is the Scotch game. And if you know the Scotch game, actually, for white to tear open the center immediately before even castling, it actually has its advantages if you know exactly what you're doing, because it doesn't give black a chance to develop either. He has to react to this pawn being attacked twice. Pawn's being attacked by d4 and f3, only guarded once, so he's got to come up with something. He has to do something. So let's take a look and see what Bertrand does. Okay, he decides to take the pawn with the knight. Knight takes pawn, Napoleon takes back, and Bertrand takes with the pawn. And I guess Napoleon should take back with the queen, I guess, and everything will be even. Let's take a look. Nope. He says, I can take this pawn anytime I want. I'm going to develop quick, get ready to castle. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That looks pretty good. Bertrand says, if you're not going to take my pawn for free, you're not going to be able to take it now. I'm going to guard it, okay? And I get to develop a piece at the same time. Development and guarding. Napoleon says, I'm going to attack it one more time. So I'm still going to attack that pawn at d4. And let's see what you're going to do. Bertrand says, I'll attack your e4 pawn. Go ahead, you can take mine. I'll take yours, and then I'll take this one also, because I'll have 2 on it. Napoleon says, okay, help yourself. Take the free pawn with your queen. Of course, if the pawn takes the queen, the rook's just going to come over and pin the queen to the king, and you're going to lose a queen. So even Napoleon at that time knew castling fast. That was very nice. Okay? Queen up to guard this pawn a second time, because it's being attacked twice. It's now being guarded twice. And Napoleon said, oh, let me attack your queen. Now, at first glance, this looks interesting. The queen would have to move, but you could push this pawn and have a discovered check. But after you push the pawn and the king moves to the corner, what's the follow-up? I don't see another follow-up because, see, there's only 2 pieces out here, and the rest of them aren't helping. So I think this discovered check would be wasted. So let's see what Bertrand does after f4. Yep, pawn takes pawn check. So he does give him a discovered check, and he gets a pawn in the bargain. King to h1 is correct. Is that right? Yep. Okay. And pawn takes pawn again. So he figured, oh boy, I'll get a couple of pawns. I'll only give up one. Pawn takes pawn. Okay. No, it's real interesting. All right, guys, let me take a look at this. Let me see how this works out. Okay. Very nice. Napoleon, being a general of the army, decides to try some tactics. All because this knight hasn't been developed, the king hasn't been castled, and these two are still locked in. Bishop takes f7, check. An interesting sacrifice. Okay? Now, let's take a look and see what happens. If the king takes the bishop, queen, I guess, b3, king has to go somewhere, and then you can take and attack the queen, and maybe the queen is trapped.
Why not take it with the pawn? Take it with the pawn.
Oh yeah, the queen would be, that's right, the queen is under attack with the pawn.
And you discover check.
Yeah, so the king can't take, because he'll just take the queen, right, with the discovered check. There you go. Up. King to d8, is that correct? Yep. And pawn, and Napoleon picks up a queen. Yeah. He tempoed him, guys, he tempoed him. But Remisat takes the rook, pawn with the rook, and he says, give me back my queen. And he gets his queen right back with a rook. Okay. Bishop takes knight. So what happens if he takes here? He gets checkmated, I think, over here. Maybe not. All right, he doesn't take. What he does is, I think, bishop back to e7. Is that correct? Yes. Queen up to protect the bishop. Well, if he takes, I think this is mate right here. The rook here is mate. Oh, wait a second. If he takes here, no. That's right. If he takes, this is not here. All right, so check. Bishop block. Bishop takes. King up. And then maybe queen over here, check. And along with the rook, he will get mated. Along this open F file, he will get mated with the queen and the rook. He will get mated. So he had to block this first. All right. With a view, so let's take a look. Queen 3. The only thing I can think about this move is that he's going to shoot here. He's got to get the queen off this diagonal. Check. Sure enough, bishop takes rook. Napoleon was seeing all these sacrifices. Check. Bishop back. Now bishop takes bishop, check. Yep. King takes bishop. Queen check. He can't go out. He has to go back here. mate. And Napoleon saw all of those sacrifices. So he hadn't lost anything even though he was in exile. You know, he was playing really tough. That was really beautiful. And again, let's take a look at the board. 1, 2, 3 pieces undeveloped. Every piece but 1 not developed, which means he was playing 6 against 3. He could afford to sacrifice all that stuff and still have enough to checkmate him. If you don't get your pieces out, guys, this is what will happen. The other side can sacrifice a lot of pieces back and still checkmate you. Development is the key. Morphy came up with it in the 1840s and 50s, so this is the 1820s. So it was only 25 years later that Morphy really made it a science of getting your pieces out quick, but Napoleon was 25 years ahead of him. And he hadn't lost anything. Wow. That's probably one of the reasons he ran the world for about 15, 20 years. Okay.